So we'll talk about your project in Abu Dhabi, of
Okay.
course. And Abu Dhabi's skyline could be described as fanciful or eccentric, or you could pick the adjective. But I would not describe Goettsch Partners building there as such. I would probably liken it more towards rectilinear, modernist sort of restraint. So how do you see it fitting on the skyline there, and how would you describe the form?
Well, I think you're correct and perceptive, but I just would make one correction or observation.
Sure.
I think that people are always thinking about Dubai, and the Dubai skyline is the one that's really very dramatic.
True.
Abu Dhabi, by comparison, is really quite subdued. And it's interesting how the city has really, I think, almost a cultural context. There's architects are used to talking about context in terms of physical context, but there's a cultural aspect. And the first project that we did in Abu Dhabi was the Abu Dhabi Financial Center. And when we started working on it, we were told, this is not Dubai, this is Abu Dhabi, and we do things differently. And it's not without a reason. Dubai was creating something really amazing out of the desert, and the ambience of these buildings and so forth is what really put Dubai on the map as a destination and so forth. Abu Dhabi is a little bit different in the sense that they had the oil and they had income, which Dubai didn't have. And so they put a lot more emphasis in doing things in a kind of a, to some extent, maybe cost-effective way. For instance, the Abu Dhabi Financial Center, when we started working on it, they said they wanted something iconic. At the same time, they told us it couldn't be more than 32 stories tall. So there's sort of a contradiction in terms. But it has to do with them being, I think, just kind of culturally and to some extent because of the wealth that they have from the oil. And they also have concentrated very heavily on trying to become free of relying on the oil industry. And I understand with their investments and so forth, they're 2 or 3 years away from being able to sustain themselves really without any petroleum profits and so forth. So it's just there are a few tall buildings in in Abu Dhabi, but not many. And for the most part, the idea there is to be very, almost like you said, that it's kind of the standard modernism and so forth.
So you mentioned responding to cultural context, and even within the United Arab Emirates, the different cultures of the various emirates.
Yeah, exactly.
Dubai and Abu Dhabi being two of them. But how does the form of your building actually contribute to that cultural context?
Well, it doesn't necessarily contribute to it, but it reflects it. And I think that's ultimately what architecture is, always a reflection of the culture, to some extent, maybe the clients and so forth. And an office building is an office building. It's kind of a building for business. And there were a lot of kind of round and strange-shaped buildings built in the Abu Dhabi and in Dubai. And quite frankly, many people found that they weren't very functional. And an office building is just something different than a museum or something, so that the idea of being functional, and they're trying to attract tenants, and the tenants are going to come and go based on, to a considerable extent, on the functionality of the building. So this is an office building. It's wasn't meant to be a form of entertainment or anything like that. So
the orange stripe in the building, does that come from the client's branding?
It did.
How do you incorporate that into the design?
It did. Almost all of their buildings have an orange stripe as a way of reflecting their brand, as you said. And quite frankly, it took us a little bit of getting used to as an idea. But because in the beginning they just said they wanted it on there, so we didn't know what that meant. Is that an orange spot up in the top and so forth? But so I think we worked it into the building in a way that is complementary to the building and still accomplish their goals.
Describe how you did work it in.
Okay, well, some of the orange that you see is actually a glass that has a silk screen. On the outside, it is that orange color. On the inside, it's overscreened with black. So when you inside the building, you look out, it's kind of like there's like it's a tinted glass. But when you're outside and you see the orange, it's very clear. So that was basically the way that was accomplished. And for instance, in the lobby, they liked the idea that we use the Rosa Verona marble, which has that kind of orangish cast, and seemed like it worked well with the rest of the building.
Talk about the building. Anytime that you build a glassy building in a hot desert climate, there's always the question of how it can be energy efficient or sustainable in a larger sense. So how did you approach that with this building?
Well, first of all, I'm always a little bit embarrassed to try to make a big claim about a building being sustainable when you're building it in the desert. So it's relative from that standpoint.
Sure.
But the coatings for glass now are extremely efficient compared to what they used to be. And so in terms of this, the Hilal Bank, it's almost floor-to-ceiling glass. But in spite of that, it's able to improve over the ASHRAE 90 energy standards by 12%, just by the combination of the selection of the glass. But we're also using the considerable amount of natural daylight as a way of reducing the internal electrical load. So there's a little bit of a balance there, but basically we're relying very heavily on the coating, the effectiveness of the glass technology coatings.
I guess I have another question for you, maybe the last question, unless there's something else you want to bring up. You've worked a lot in the Middle East, and Goettsch as a firm has, and increasingly so. And I just wonder what frontiers of design, or what cities, what parts of the region, what ideas are most exciting and interesting to you when you think about future work?
Well, that's a very good question. The situation has really changed considerably since we started working. There was a considerable downturn and so forth, and I think as things come back, things in a way get a little more practical. But I think the challenge in that circumstance is to work within a very practical set of circumstances and still do something that's interesting and deviates from the norm or what is generally expected. In the case of the Al Hilal Bank, we use glass really for two reasons. One, in the presentation this morning, I showed a picture of the building on the day that the photographer arrived. It happened to be a sandstorm. You couldn't, from half a block away, you could not see the building, just barely make the outline. And of course, the next day when he starts taking pictures, the building is covered with brown sand, and it's very clear in the picture. And then the next picture I showed the building after it was cleaned up, and of course it's very crisp and clear. And it shows, I think, on the one hand that in that climate, glass is really a good thing because it's something that is capable of being cleaned. The other thing that we did on that building, one of the things that I think is maybe the least desirable about all glass buildings is very often the glass is the reflections are all fractured and so forth, and so when you see something, another building reflected in a glass building, it looks fairly unpleasant, or can from time to time. So we actually use glass fins on the outside, laminated glass fins, and with an inner layer so that when you're looking at the building, there's always a very precise lines from these laminated fins which tend to offset, I think, the irregular reflections that result from the unevenness of the glass. So glass is a pretty interesting product. It's very strong, it's durable, and it has, of course, the benefits of being transparent, although it can be translucent as well. There are so many different ways that you can use glass that it seems to work almost anywhere.